Biden and Xi met for the first time in a year, and what a reunion it was. Nepal investigates corruption at a Chinese-built airport, and people are paying thousands of dollars to eat with Xi Jinping. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, you should be using a VPN like Surfshark to cover your tracks and protect your identity. Well, it finally happened. Joe Biden and Xi Jinping met this week, which means we can all sing Kumbaya and sleep soundly knowing we've secured world peace. Here's their warm greeting to each other.
Well, Mr. President, it's good to see you again. We've spent many hours together over the last 10 or 12 years, and to host you in the United States is a great honor and a pleasure.
Last time we met in Bali, you said it was a year and a day ago. A lot has happened since then. China-US relationship has never been smooth sailing over the past 50 years or more, and it always faces problems of one kind or another. Yet it has kept moving forward amid twists and turns.
Not been smooth sailing? Maybe the understatement of the year here. China sent a spy balloon over the U.S. Chinese pilots have been harassing U.S. planes in international airspace. And China is still blaming the U.S. for COVID. But hey, at least Biden and Xi are talking, am I right? China seems to be pretending to play ball with the U.S., probably because its export-driven economy isn't doing so well right now, and it needs some U.S. money badly. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry got some vague promises on green technology and restarting climate change talks, although all the hot air coming out of China's mouth on this might actually be canceling out any progress they make on global warming. Xi also agreed to work with Biden on stopping illegal Chinese fentanyl shipments, which I believe is at least the fourth time in 3 presidents now. And Xi also promised to restore military-to-military talks, which you may remember were only called off because China wanted vengeance over Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan last year. You know, I'm sure some people would see all this as progress, but I have a hard time seeing this as anything but China dangling 3 giant carrots in front of the U.S. And gee, if you continue to arm Taiwan, we might take all these nice carrots away again. Wouldn't that be a real shame, Or, you know, if Biden calls Xi a dictator again, which he did right after the meeting.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country that is a communist country that's based on a form of government totally different than ours.
Good on Biden for calling a spade a spade. As an American, I'm proud that he's sticking to his principles and isn't backing down from holding Xi to account.
We had to concede to allow export licenses to go into Huawei. At the same time, the sanctions on human rights violations, we lifted those. They're not enforcing the sanctions, I should say, really just as a precondition to get in the room to have a meeting.
Okay, well, maybe Biden had to compromise on his principles just a little bit to make this happen, but he stuck it to the man on human rights abuses, I'm sure. In a readout of the meeting, the White House said Biden raised concerns regarding China's human rights abuses, including in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong. On Taiwan, President Biden emphasized that our one China policy has not changed and has been consistent across decades and administrations. That's interesting. That sounds a lot like what China wants the U.S. to say about Taiwan. According to Chinese state media, Xi said the U.S. side should take real actions to honor its commitment of not supporting Taiwan independence, stop arming Taiwan, and support China's peaceful reunification. China will realize unification, and this is unstoppable. And so, despite promising to invade a sovereign country just then, Xi Jinping got a warm round of applause from business leaders at a dinner that evening, where tickets were a mere $2,000 a head. Man, the food must have been really good. Let me guess, Uyghur filet mignon seasoned with Tibetan tears? Oh, and according to the New York Times, for $40,000, companies can purchase 8 seats at a table plus 1 seat at Mr. Xi's table. What a bargain! I bet you could even get a signature from Mr. Schietler himself for another $10,000. Outside the meeting, Xi Jinping got an equally warm welcome. Funny how people who choose not to live in Xi Jinping's China are so happy to see him when he visits. Must be a very special bond they have. There were some people, though, who were not fans of Xi. Protesters for Tibet and Hong Kong were all out in force. They hung this giant banner from a parking garage that says, "Dictator Xi Jinping, your time is up." However, it got ripped down by some, shall we say, very patriotic Chinese men. Hong Kong and Tibetan activists also reported being attacked by Xi's supporters. Gosh, it's almost like supporting a genocidal dictator makes you a not very peaceful person. But here's the thing. Xi Jinping is a communist dictator who covered up COVID and over 1 million Americans died. And he just got a red carpet welcome in San Francisco. Kumbaya. And after the break, a Florida man is charged with bombing a Chinese embassy. Welcome back. The Department of Justice has charged a Florida lawyer with attempting to bomb the outer wall of the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. They claim the man put a bag full of explosives against the back wall and outer fence of the Chinese embassy at some point before 3 a.m. on September 25th. Then he attempted to set off the explosive device with a few gunshots. The bomb never went off, however, which is probably why you never heard of it. But nonetheless, he's being charged with damaging property occupied by a foreign government. Now, if I were his defense lawyer, I would try to get that charge thrown out on the grounds that China doesn't have a government. It has a mob boss with a bunch of cronies. While that bomb didn't go off, what has exploded recently is China's head over Estonia's plan to open up what it calls a non-diplomatic economic or cultural representation of Taipei. Because Estonia doesn't have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, it can't have a Taiwanese embassy or consulate there. But the way Taiwan gets around this is by having unofficial offices devoted to economic and cultural exchanges. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbing called on the Estonian side to abide by its solemn commitment to the One China principle. So far, this hasn't deterred Estonia. It says this doesn't go against the One China principle, which is about recognizing only one China. Many countries have these kinds of cultural and economic offices with Taiwan, but that hasn't stopped China from retaliating against countries that open them. After Lithuania opened one in 2021, China stopped imports from Lithuania and withdrew its ambassador. The good news is that the more China does stuff like this, the more people realize that China is controlled by a group of mob bosses. Speaking of which, the Philippines is dropping out of China's Belt and Road Initiative. It claims it's doing this because Beijing did not respond to funding requests on railway projects. China had pledged almost $5 billion to build 3 rail lines in the country and had several projects already underway. But, according to the Philippines, that's no longer on the table. Now the Philippines is reportedly looking at Japan and India to fill the gap. And I bet the CCP loves that. Another likely reason the Philippines is pulling out is because China claims the entire South China Sea. China has become so aggressive in both international waters and the Philippines' own exclusive economic zone that U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin felt the need to repeat the United States' ironclad commitment to Philippines' defense this week. According to K-Asia, the U.S. is also finalizing an intel sharing agreement with the Philippines. Which just goes to show bullies don't get invited to many birthday parties, unless they have lots of money and then you have to pay to sit next to them. Speaking of the Belt and Road, Nepal is investigating a new airport built by China as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. A spokesperson for Nepal's anti-corruption agency didn't say exactly what Nepal was investigating, only that it's in response to a complaint about irregularities with the project, probably that made in China quality. Local media said the agency received over 20 complaints about construction quality of the airport. But this comes after a New York Times investigation found that the Chinese company that built the airport inflated the cost and undermined Nepal's efforts to enforce quality control. The Times says that shortly after its article came out, the Nepal's Commission for the Investigation of Abuse and Authority raided the Pokhara offices of the Civil Aviation Authority and seized documents related to the project. The $216 million international airport opened in January. However, the airport has turned into an expensive white elephant because it doesn't have the traffic to make it profitable. Nepal has asked China to turn its loan into a grant, but so far, China has declined. And for completely unrelated reasons, I'm sure, Nepal is banning TikTok. Nepal's cabinet banned it over its negative effects on social harmony. which is a nice way of saying TikTok rots people's brains and brings out the worst in them. Nepal's government also said a large section of society had criticized TikTok for encouraging hate speech. Yeah, like I said, it brings out the worst in people. If you think George Orwell's dystopian idea of 2 minutes of hate in 1984 was bad, TikTok is like 2 hours of hate. And speaking of hate, CNN says it believes China is using the world's largest known online disinformation operation to harass Americans. It says the Chinese government is using it to harass U.S. residents, politicians, and businesses, at times threatening its targets with violence. For example, Chinese government workers posed as residents of Texas and pretended to oppose a rare earth mine. China produces or processes almost all the world's rare earth elements, you see. If China could get enough opposition to shut down any U.S. mines, it would be harder for the U.S. to become independent from China. But China is trying to become more independent of the U.S. China tightened export controls on rare earths earlier this month by requiring exporters to report real-time data on their shipments. This could, for example, make it easier for Beijing to stop exports from going to certain countries. Countries that, like to anger China. And hey, do you know what Marxism and cannibalism have in common? I've got a video I want to show you about that, but first, this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. When you go online, everything you do is being tracked and logged by the websites you visit and your internet service provider, in many cases by your government. That's why no matter where you live or what you do online, you should always be keeping your internet activity private with a VPN. Surfshark has servers you can connect to in over 100 countries, more than any other VPN. That makes your connection faster and more reliable. Plus, Surfshark has top-of-the-line encryption and a no-logs policy, meaning they don't collect your browsing data. That's why Surfshark was rated Editor's Choice for the best VPN for privacy and security by PCMag. So check out Surfshark. With just one Surfshark account, you can connect as many devices as you want. Try it out now because this month they're having a special Black Friday deal. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored to get up to 6 additional months for free. That's surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code UNCENSORED. The link is in the description. And here's that video about the similar origins of cannibalism and Marxism. Click on that video. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.